Today's learning target is I can add and subtract rational numbers with common denominators. When I have fractions with common denominators, and common denominators are denominators that are the same, that becomes a pretty simple problem. All I'm going to do is add across the numerators. So in this case I have 7 in the numerator and 6, so that gives me 13 in the numerator. And the denominators, when I add, a common mistake people make is they will add these together and put 20. Now keep in mind, a denominator tells us the size of the fraction we're dealing with. Okay, so these are tenths. So when I add 7 tenths and 6 tenths, that doesn't change the size of the fraction to 20ths. It's still tenths. So my denominator is 10. And now I want to write this improper fraction as a mixed number. And remember, to do that, we simply look at this as dividing. So this is 13 divided by 10, which I did down here. And once I divide that out, we can see I got 1 with a remainder of 3. The 1 here tells us how many wholes are in there. So this is going to equal 1 whole. And the 3 for the remainder tells us how many of those tenths are left. And remember the denominator is always, it will stay consistent because we're still dealing with tenths. So 1 3/10 is my answer. If I'm solving a problem like this one here, 5/8 plus -7/8, okay, I keep my denominator the same because they're common denominators, and then oftentimes what you'll see is people will write it like this, so that otherwise it gets a little confusing having the plus and minus sign right by each other. So now when I do this, I'm left with 5 plus a -7 is -2 over 8, which is equal, when I divide both those by 2, I get 1/4, and it's negative. If I'm going to add two mixed numbers like I have here, the first thing I can do is just add my whole numbers. So 2 plus 3 gives me 5. Okay, and then the 3/8 plus the 7/8 equals 10/8. Okay, now I'm left with 5 10/8. Now I can see that this fraction right here is worth more than 1 whole because the numerator is bigger than the denominator. So I'm going to have to figure out what is this as a mixed number. And I'm going to do that by taking 10 divided by 8. And mentally I know that that's going to be 1 with a remainder of 2, so it's going to be 1 2/8. So I add that to my 5, okay, and I'm left with 6 2/8, which when I simplify down, 2/8 divide both by 2 is going to give me 1/4. So my final answer is 6 1/4. And take a look here at how I've shown my thinking. That's an important part in doing these problems. Notice that when I did this part mentally to get it to 1 2/8, I didn't show the math for that, right? But what I did is I showed how I showed from here to here. So that's fine. I skipped the mental math part, but I'm showing it right here. And then here again, I'm just showing, I'm breaking this fraction down, dividing by 2, right there. When I'm subtracting and I have common denominators, like I do here, it's very similar to addition. Okay, so my denominators stay the same, just like in addition, and now I'm going to be solving 3 minus 9. Okay, and we know from earlier that if I did 3 minus 9, I would get -6, and my denominator is 10. And I can simplify that by dividing each by 2. So when I divide the top by 2, I get -3, and denominator fifths. So -3/5 is my answer. So the first thing that I'm going to do when I have a problem like this, so it tells us we're going to evaluate x minus y, and then here's what x and y equal, is I need to write it out. Now once I write it out, I notice something right away. I notice I'm going to be taking away 3/4 from 1/4. In order to do that, in order to make it simpler, I'm going to want to rewrite this number as a fraction that will allow me to easily take 3/4 away from whatever fraction we have here. So to do that, I can take one of the wholes away from these 3 wholes, and I'm going to change that whole into fourths so that I can add it in to this 1/4. So I know that 1 whole, if I change that to fourths, would be 4/4. So instead of having 3 wholes, I'm going to say let's have 2 wholes, and we're going to take that other whole that was right here, this 4/4, and we're going to put that in with the 1/4. So when I put 4/4 plus 1/4, I get 5/4. Okay, and now I'm going to take 1 3/4 away from that. Now, this number right here is exactly the same as this. It's just in a different form. And now the problem becomes easier. I just do my 5/4 minus 3/4, and that's going to give me 2/4, and then 2 minus 1 is 1. So this equals that, and I know if I simplify that down, it's 1 1/2. So in this problem here, I'm asked to find what 2 times A, or 2 groups of A over 10, plus 4 groups of A over 10, and what that would be. So right off the bat, I look and my denominators are the same. So I know that when I do this, I'm going to have 10 as my denominator. Now, here, if I'm looking at 2 groups of A plus 4 groups of A, what that gives me would be 6 groups of A. Okay? Because if you think of multiplication as groups of, this is 2 groups of some number and 4 groups of that same number, I now have 6 groups of whatever that number is. Okay, and now I just simplify. I can divide both those by 2, and that would give me 3/5. So I'm looking at 3A over 5 as my answer.